So anyway, so obviously one of the most distinctive things, if not the, one of the most distinctive things, is the fact that you've been running for like going on 2 years now.
Right.
So as we now get down to the time when finally, after all that time, the votes are going to be cast, I was just wondering what feels different now compared to what you thought it might be like when you first started campaigning.
So that almost has two sides to it, because I changed my one life for the other, and the new life was an unknown to me. So one of the things that I guess I was told but didn't actually sense because it wasn't in me yet was the amount of time that campaigning actually takes, and how many places you have to be. Your calendar has to be kept up to date basically like 3 or 4 times a day. So the time demands, which I had assumed were going to be pretty intense, are more than I had thought, and that's a good thing because it keeps me occupied. The money, I never thought I would get a great deal of money because, of course, I hang around with a lot of middle class and lower class people. And when the other competitors joined in that have allegiances to the system, I figured they would run away with the campaign funds, and they have. So I'm not at all disheartened or disillusioned by any of those kinds of things. The thing that has amazed me the most, it has actually nothing to do with my campaign so much as the campaign itself and my other life. I am thrilled, absolutely, completely, positively thrilled that Sustainable West Seattle, the Alki Art Fair, the Morgan Festival, and to a lesser degree Delridge Festival, because I'm still doing that, and a few other things, that we have found new, more energized human beings to step into those roles. So I'm really happy about that. And the organizations have gone off in different directions than were I to still be around. So to me, that's really cool. That's what I tried to do when I left NASA, and we found some pretty good people to fill the roles that I did there. So following yourself with somebody who's equally good, if you are an embedded individual in the community, I think is a very important thing to consider. And I'm really happy that I think myself and all of the folks that I've been working with have done a really good job of making sure that those things continue to live on. The other thing that has really surprised me is that I did not know. Obviously, I knew Shannon and I knew Lisa, and I had known Phil because, of course, he came to MoCA and became the new Morgan producer, which is really funny because he and I were both working the Morgan Festival. But the thing that really surprised me the most, I think, is the undeniable congeniality of West Seattle politicians. I'm thrilled in the sense that I have no idea at this point where we're going to go. And I don't even know if I should mention names, but Brianna Thomas and I have clicked in a way that I never thought possible. I think she's an amazing human being, and I've been really thrilled to get to know her. The same is true of Carl Wurzing. He came out of nowhere and has amazing youth. Jody, so to me, the surprise is that I knew I was going to run. I knew there were other people that were going to run. I had an idea of some of the competition. They've stepped in and stepped out. But the surprise to me was how much fun it is hanging around, being competitive with people who are running for the same seat. And so we've had great conversations. I've learned a lot. The funny thing is that we're all kind of in the same boat in that sense. And so what I've seen is that a lot of us are maneuvering our campaigns to include all of those good things that we were picking up from our colleague competitors. I kind of expected that. Actually, I led on a couple of those, so I'm not too surprised. But so I guess the surprise is, it's taken more time and less money than I thought, and I guess that's the trade-off there. And B, the competition has been enthralling. I'm actually excited to be on a dais with people that I know are going to answer things differently from me. The stranger interview was a particularly interesting one. So I guess those are the how I feel a year and a half or almost 2 years later. So, and I went out in front for a couple of reasons. I'm really interested as you might imagine from my background and my diving deep in all the things that I get involved with, I'm really interested in the administration and the logistics of a campaign, and the only way that I was going to be able to do what I wanted to do was to do it myself. And the only way to do that was to have knowledge, and the only way to have knowledge was to start early and use the time before everybody else jumped in as a learning curve. So I've done all of the PDC, Seattle Ethics, all of those kinds of things I understand. The budgeting I understand, the open books I understand. So I feel quite educated, frankly, at this moment in time. I'm very comfortable with what I'm doing as a campaign candidate.
So you've been managing your own campaign?
I've been managing my own campaign, exactly.
But so what's changed, if anything, between what you thought you would need to do if elected when you considered getting into this, and what you think you will need to do now that you've been through all this, assuming that you're elected?
On the ask that again, because I'm not quite sure.
Basically, okay, so, I mean, the ultimate goal of this, though, is not to become, a better campaign manager, but to become a city council
Right,
person.
exactly.
And obviously, when you started, you thought that, well, I want to become a city council person because X.
Right.
So has X changed between
No,
then
not
and
at
now?
all. What has added to X, if you will, is that knowing now what it takes from the inside of a campaign, because I helped Dorsal, I helped Michael, I helped David, and a few others. I did 594, I did Charter Amendment 19. So I've been, and I did, of course, the monorail. I've been in campaigns as a campaign volunteer. So I understood the mechanics of doorbelling, of phone banking, of putting street signs up. But what I didn't understand was the reporting and the ethical purity that must be maintained, and the walls that you must keep between certain parts of your campaign. I now understand that to an incredible fairly well. I'm still a wee bit disappointed that the federal rules for campaign purity are much, much, much tighter than those in Washington State or Seattle City. I'm really used to the Hatch Act, where you can't take anything from anybody for any reason, and I've been a bit nonplussed, I guess is the right word, as a candidate here with what I could seemingly do, which seems a little bit sort of off-kilter to me. So, but as a candidate, and knowing the ethics and the reporting and the maintenance of these walls between certain things, that will help me as a city council member, because I go in now knowing a little bit more about the ethics of the position. I don't really have to be briefed. Actually, I didn't think I was going to have to be briefed anyway, because I worked for the feds, and there's a lot more that you do as a fed than you do as a city council member.
But in terms of what you want to do from the heart, what actions you want to take as a city council member, has that? I mean, if I wanted to run, it's because, boy, I hope to pass a law about X or
no,
something.
I think so. Funny thing is, and I mean, transportation equity and accountability. That hasn't changed. That really hasn't changed. And what to me is inspiring is that almost every other candidate throughout the entire city has picked up those threads, because that's really the issues in this town right now. The transportation, you can't get anywhere in any mode in any reasonable period of time, except basically by foot. The equity, the distribution of wealth, and the distribution of, let's say, impacting services has been unequal for so long that lots of folks are now realizing that. And the accountability component, especially with Murray doing a lot of these secret things that he's been doing, that has actually popped up to the forefront. So no, I'm actually really pleased that, let's say November of 2013, I had a really good set of conversations with a lot of people who are on my team, and a lot of direction on focusing down on what is the message, focusing down on what do you want to do, focusing down on what it is that a city council person can do to make change, because basically all they do is legislate and approve budgets. So to me, it hasn't changed. It's actually deepened the commitment. I'm now really happy to hear other people talking about transportation and the impacts. I'm really happy about other people talking about Mercer. How many? $230 million of investment in Mercer Street, and nothing has changed since we started construction there, and yet $230 million would do an amazing amount of things throughout the city. So that and the accountability, holding people accountable. I mean, the best example right now, I guess, is our new police chief, Kathleen O'Toole, she's going to have to fire some of those officers at some point, or her job is not going to be a good job. I mean, we're holding her in high respect right now because she seems to be following the Justice Department's rules and being accountable and going out and doing the whole community policing thing. But if some of those bad cops aren't gotten rid of, we still have a bad police force. So to me, the accountability part on the behalf of SPD still needs to sink in. I think our new Seattle Police Officers Guild spokesperson is a good person. I think he's sent some messages out that, you can have personal thoughts, but they have to remain personal thoughts. So, but yeah, the transportation equity and accountability, I'm actually pleased. That's a discussion now that is 47 candidates are talking about that, and
You
2013 there's only one candidate.
So you broached kind of a topic. It's a very popular topic this week in your last answer, which was what the mayor's been up to, and there's been a leak. In which leak is a word leak documents something we normally associate with the other Washington. So when did you first become aware of the whole single family home suggestion, we'll call it that, and where do you stand with all of that?
So I've been, I guess, I've been auditing the course for the people who have been working on the other housing initiative, which is the people that aren't on HALA. And so I've been getting information from both camps. The conversion of, let me restate that, the upzoning of urban villages has been discussed. I don't think it was discussed quite as specifically as let's take a row of single-family homes and duplex or triplex them. Although, the funny thing is, when I first moved here in 2003, at my first meeting at the Morgan Community Association, I had proposed, and I got involved there because of the monorail station, I had proposed to Cindy Barker and whoever our president was at the time, that it would be nice to extend the commercial zone of California Avenue up the hill into the single family zone, which was near my neighborhood, near your house. Mm-hmm. And I got so beat upon by everybody in the room. I thought, oh my God, you guys have no idea what it's like to live in a single family zone surrounded by real businesses. So that was a welcome to Seattle, SFH situation. I'm encouraged. I think a lot of the urban villages around here one of the transitions could be easily from low rise to duplex to single family. And if you go around Woodland Park Zoo, you'll see a lot of those kinds of things left over from the 20s and 30s in brick. And it seems to work. You have nice houses, and then you have a row of townhouses. If you tour any eastern city, Baltimore is in the news lately, but Baltimore has some really wonderful housing on North Charles Street, which evolves from townhouses and row houses into single-family houses and ultimately estates as you get near Johns Hopkins. So we could do that, and it would be, I agree, it would be a way to increase the accommodatability, if you will, of an urban village for housing. It's a very tricky special question because, of course, people who own houses have a property right which goes with the ownership. And from what it seems, there's been no discussion within the HALA group that involves people who actually might be affected by these changes. The conversation seems to have taken place by people who try to provide housing for folks, by folks who are trying to find rooms for the homeless, by folks who are trying to lower the cost of housing in the city. But nowhere have I seen like a list of representative homeowner from Roosevelt, or representative homeowner from Beacon, or representative homeowner from Arbor Heights. So to me, the failing of that committee right now is that if they're going to impose changes on a group of citizens who happen to have ownership rights, then that group of ownership individuals have to be involved in the conversation. I'm not opposed to it. I think it's a reasonably good idea. I think it's a good approach. But the fact that the mayor has included not a single homeowner representing a single neighborhood disturbs me a lot.
I know Cindy's on that committee, though.
Yeah, but she's representing the land use committee of the city neighborhood council more than she is, Cindy Barker, who lives on Morgan, exactly. And I know there, and so Cindy, right, and Cindy, by the way, has opposed a lot of what HALA as have others. Like I said, I think it's a good approach. The issue, of course, for West Seattle is all of our transit-oriented development has no transit associated with it. So as far as most of us can tell, it's basically just development. I mean, I was on, a really good example would be, yesterday I was trying to get downtown in the afternoon, and so I did my usual trick, was drive to Beacon Park, and in this case I took Link rather than walk, because I didn't have enough time to get there. I had a couple of things going on. And I get on Link at, gosh, I forget what the time was, at Beacon Hill Station, and 40 minutes later, 40 minutes later, I get out at University Street Station. Why? Because the Mariners had just let out.
Right.
So we have a transit system which is unable to accommodate its own regular riders with the impact of the surface through SoDo. And so that alone is another reason why I'm completely opposed to any new stadiums in SoDo. I mean, if it affects Link, imagine what it would do for buses. So I'm jumping subjects, I know, but I am completely opposed to public funding for stadiums, and absolutely opposed to any additional impact to transit use through SoDo, including Hanson's Stadium if it comes to that.
Actually, transportation is something that we were going to ask about, not just because it's one of your specialties, but, again, in this case, we've covered, the boards and, groups that you've been on over the years, at least some of them here. And what I always recall quite vividly is, you asking questions for, advocating for, repeatedly for things that seem logical but don't seem to ever get done. Is there any one or two specific ones regarding, especially the West Seattle ingress-egress issue, that you think that you could advocate for, if elected, at least to start trying to make it
Yeah,
happen?
I do, and I think and I've talked to other existing council members and some of my colleagues. So, best case, ST3 passes, we get linked to West Seattle and Ballard through whatever means, and since we know that it's not going to be 2023 until Northgate opens, so you can just add 7 years to whenever West Seattle, so 2030 would conceivably be the earliest that we would have an opportunity to take rapid rail of any form from anywhere in West Seattle to anywhere else. In the meantime, we know that it took it took a year longer than it should have, but it took 2.5 years to build the First Avenue on and off ramp of the Spokane Viaduct. It took 18 months to build the Fourth Avenue off ramp. So my proposal, and I've done some legwork with photographs, walked around the footing of the off ramp from Spokane to 99 North. So my feeling is that, given the fact that we're not going to have any true grade separated access to downtown through any form of transit, we're going to have to build something. And so there's a carbon cost that I'm going to ask for, and there's going to be a capital investment cost. And I'm figuring that it'll probably be between $200 and $300 million, but I'm proposing that we have a Spokane off-ramp to 99 North extra deck, and that extra deck serves buses only, so that you have a transit-only lane from the moment you get on the Spokane Viaduct to the moment you hit the end of the line there, right before you have to go 2 lanes to get to Seneca. And since that construction will end eventually with everybody leaving, either taking the tunnel or getting off at Atlantic, such an investment would actually remain true to the end of the Bertha project. We would still have bus access using that same, no matter where the bus goes once it gets off at Atlantic, you'd still have complete transit free ride from presumably Avalon to the off point. So yes, I would argue seriously that in the next 2 to 3 years we have the plans, we have the engineering, we find the capital projects, and if necessary we hit the feds up because it's a transit thing, and we actually build a real access for transit. Because right now you sit there and you wait to merge. I mean, buses have priority, but you still, you're going around the loop there. You have no advantage in transit whatsoever, which is why only 30% of the people that take the bridge use transit, because the other people can shave, they can put on their lipstick, they can eat their breakfast, whatever, listen to NPR without headphones. So that's something that we could do now. When I look at what we've done with Mercer, knowing that 5 years ago when the project first started, Nick Licata was running around town saying, this is going to do nothing, it's going to cost you 4 more minutes if you're going west. You know, I mean, there were no reasons other than, I suppose, it's a beautification project, and Mohi now appears magically across this beautifully large, but not really navigable by pedestrians, boulevard. If we had taken that same money and rebuilt the Magnolia Bridge, we'd probably still have enough money left over to do a Spokane, bus lane to the 99 North. So, yeah, I think the city has spent money for transportation in the wrong areas the last decade. I would push for, as I said, a carbon impact and a capital investment. But that would remain true whenever the tunnel opens. That would still be a transit lane only. So that would be a permanent addition that we could have, I'm guessing, within 2 to 3 years, since that's the amount of time it took to build the First Avenue and Fourth Avenue additions.
So you brought up Denny now twice. And, of course, the big issue on the ballot, besides the council members' election, of course, is the transit levy.
Right.
You going to vote for it?
So this is something that everybody must decide for themselves. My doorbelling in West Seattle, which has hit Highland Park, Arbor Heights, Fairmount Springs, Genesee, East Junction, Admiral, Alki, portions of Alki, portions of Beach Drive, and now High Point. I have heard a lot of people complain that that's too much money with very little return on the investment for West Seattle. I've heard a lot of people say they're encouraged by the pedestrian and bicycle improvements. I've heard an equal number of people who complain that the bicycle improvements seem to be disproportionate in terms of funding for the number of people served.
Okay, but that's them.
That's them. So I will vote no. And that's because, in my opinion, just like the previous, Metro Transit levy, for which I was the poster boy, by the way, the $60 car tab. If you vote no for something which is bad, that means they have to go back and they have to redesign it. And I am perfectly willing, and I've told Scott Kubley 3 times in person that, the city may pass it, but I will put my name out there that the majority of folks in West Seattle will not vote for it because it doesn't do almost anything for us. The 35th Avenue Safety Project was already ongoing. The Roxbury Safety Project was already ongoing. The Safe Routes to School, God, that's been going on since Feet first partnered with the state, like almost 10 years ago. So all of those projects, which are highlighted as benefits to West Seattle of the Move Seattle levy, actually they're bogus. They were already part of the plan for West Seattle. The Fauntleroy Boulevard was already part of the plan. The fact that money got put in to finish it, that's the new thing. But we were going to get the money anyway. So to me, this is my own personal opinion, is this is a city ruse to continue to use non-correct funds, non-general funds, for purposes of creating general fund services. So they're taxing us extra to basically do the things that they should already have enough management oversight to continue to do under the general fund. So I'm opposed to the shenanigans that City Council and the Mayor are going through for this. I'm opposed to continuing to spend 25% of SDOT budget on citizen largesse, and I can't wait to sit on City Council and get the Transportation Department books in front of me and go over every single page with a manager from that department and find what I expect to be a lot of fluff. I cannot imagine that that a budget that they've got that's this large, that has this much largesse, the Bridging the Gap and now the Move Seattle, they keep putting extra money in, but they don't seem to manage what they have correctly. So yes, I'm personally voting no. It's a conscience issue for everybody, but in my assessment, West Seattle does not benefit, frankly, at all. I mean, we benefit in the fact that 25% of the SDOT budget will not be cut. But in terms of, are we getting our money's worth? No, I don't think we're getting our money's worth. And the fact that we've asked for a breakdown in every single one of those categories for the last, 8 weeks and have gotten nothing tells me that there really is no plan. It's more of a shopping list rather than a project list.
How would you rewrite it then? I mean, I assume you'd put the Spokane bus ramp in there.
Well, I would rewrite it so that every neighborhood, every district actually, its principal concern was actually answered. The principal concern for District 7 is the Magnolia Bridge, right? Not the freaking First Avenue streetcar. To me, the disadvantage of what we did with the buses is we no longer have bus service on First Avenue. First Avenue was an awesome boulevard, let's say 5 years ago. and you had bus service, you could catch a bus any 2 minutes, and half of them went to West Seattle. So now, First Avenue isn't frequented by people who live here, it's frequented by the tourists. So we've actually lost access to our own main street because of SDOT planning and metro planning changes. So yes, I would look at the $930 million, and if there's bike projects, I'd break them out by project. We have a bike plan. We ought to be able to say we can do this, 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 and this. We have a pedestrian plan. We ought to be able to say we can build sidewalks here, we can build sidewalks here, and we can connect these schools. But I don't see that. What I see is funds for these philosophical elements with no project plan behind it, therefore no accountability. So as I said, I'm seriously concerned that this city has lost the ability to manage general fund funds correctly, and are using us, the residents and the citizens and the taxpayers, as their slush fund.
What about the argument that that's Tim Eyman's fault and that's why we have to have all these levies? I've heard that before.
You know, yeah, so you defer some things, and apparently we've deferred street maintenance for over a decade to the point now where we have some serious rebuilds that we have to go through. So why did we have to rebuild 85th Street? Because we had allowed it to deteriorate to the point where it had to be rebuilt. So, you know, this is the penny-wise, pound-foolish approach that the city has taken. I don't know that you can go all the way back to Mayor Nichols and say it began with his administration, but it seems that it has not changed one iota since I've moved here, and it's only gotten worse. And I moved here during the Nichols administration. So 12 years of SDOT continuing to spend money in areas that are nice to have, but not necessarily absolutely important. I mean, it took, Mayor McGinn 2 years of his term before we actually had a pothole ranger squad that actually responded correctly, and yet potholes on 35th Avenue right by Alaska Street have been developing on a regular basis since I've moved here. So, yeah, so I don't think that I think Tim Eyman is a great excuse that people say, well, we don't have enough money to do this, that, or the other. No, the real issue is we don't have enough smarts to look at what we're doing and to manage it correctly and to provide the maintenance for the streets that are necessary when it's necessary. A good example today, it was brought to my attention that we're putting 20-mile-an-hour street signs on Fairmount Lane from Admiral all the way down to where it hits Harbor Avenue. I use that street. I can't imagine anybody actually going over 20. The road doesn't support that. So to whatever degree the signs and the staff time and the printing are costing me as a taxpayer for superfluous signage, that's an example to me of SDOT waste and failure to manage their maintenance budget correctly.
Yeah, good point. What has it occurred? Do you have any particular topic that people aren't asking you about that you don't get to talk about enough along the way? Is there something that you think everybody should be talking about and they just aren't?
Well, not topics. I think we all hit the right topics. I think affordability. I think the impact to the elderly. I think, one of my pet topics, frankly, and we are starting to talk about it because I'm starting to bring it up. I think those with disabilities in this city are not treated correctly. We try and do race and social justice. We try and do LGBTQ. I even saw an I, and I don't even know what the I stands for. We try and do all of these things that are the right things to do, but we fail to recognize that there are people who can't see, there are people who can't hear, there are people that walk very slowly, there are people in wheelchairs, there are people that stumble, and we just assume that they're somehow taken care of by the rest of these initiatives that we have, and that's not the case. And how do I know that? Because I hang around a bunch of people who are blind, and they're all the time telling me things that the city doesn't do that they should do, and every time I get a hold of somebody like a Jim Curtin or a Brian DePlace, who's the pedestrian guy, along with Jim being the safety guy, they tell me that yes, that's a priority, but they don't follow through. That's another example of the city's inability to correctly manage. We have, 7 or 8 years ago, I sat in a room with SDOT folks and some construction folks from big league companies and little league companies representing Feet First to talk about why are we closing sidewalks downtown and causing people to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for 3 blocks in a row. And SDOT promised me that that would change, that we would no longer prohibit or remove pedestrian access block after block after block. And yet, right now, in downtown Seattle, we have the same thing going on, which means that SDOT has failed in their own plan to prevent that from happening. So you have impact after impact after impact. Blind people, some of the walkways have low rail so that people that use sticks will know where they are. Some of them don't. That should be universal. How is it that New York City can put structures in place that people can walk through, or Washington, D.C., or almost any other city, without blocking pedestrian passageway? And they put the construction trailer on top. So I understand downtown in the area around the Amazon campus that there are probably no more lane miles left to put your concrete trucks. So some areas have to be worked around, if you will. But to me, the inattention of the city and the failure to follow their own guidelines with respect to pedestrian access and those with disabilities is just phenomenal. And yet we claim to be a friendly city for the disabled. And actually, in the world of the blind, this is actually considered to be a good city. And yet I see what we do, and I think, God, this is so... Remember, I did the NASA accessibility for our visitor centers and our web. I know what works. And the city of Seattle is not providing accessibility for those with disabilities, or actually accessibility for pedestrians in construction zones. So that's one thing. The other thing I would like to, that hasn't been brought out, which is actually a personal trait, this is the third city in a row that I've lived in during the period of time when that city experienced its most massive growth phase in its entire history. So to the degree that I lived in Houston from 73 to 80 when it doubled in size and built 1,000 miles of freeway, to the degree that I lived in D.C. from 80 to 2003 when its population more than doubled and they built 100 miles of subway, I'm now living in Seattle at a point when its population will also double. And we're trying our darndest to do those things that cities do. And we have this conflict between the urbanistas and the NIMBYs, if you will. That's a good title, frankly, for a team. But at the same time, there are those of us that have lived in this same situation before and who have either been back to see the result or have lived through the result. And so throwing up, 5/3 wood over concrete, I can guarantee you in 10 years those buildings are going to be ragged, because that's what they did in Houston 30 years ago. And those buildings are now gone because it's easier to tear down and replace than it is to fix something that's half rotten. So I look at Ballard and I think, all those blocks around 20th to 24th, from Market all the way up to basically 55th, as best as I can tell, half of those buildings are probably going to have some serious, habilitation or rehabilitation issues in another decade. And we are encouraging that kind of development without realizing that in another decade we're going to be looking at a massive reconstruction phase. That's the part that disturbs me, is our DPD does not seem to look at the long haul effects of what we're allowing to be constructed. It's not just the impact on the neighborhood, it's the actual construction methodology and whether that structure will last or not. So
part of the things we sometimes get feedback on, and of course you've been in the neighborhood groups, is the DPDs come out, the SDOTs come out, Metro from the county for rapid transit. They listen, they go away, nothing happens. And I don't think we have to tell you that one. You've heard that before. If you're elected, is it time to change some of the processes of how these people come out and meet with us?
Actually, I don't think it's time to change the process. I think it's time to change where in the process that begins. Because right now, as we know, there's already a half a plan, if not 3/4 of a plan, when they present it. And they have spent enough engineering hours, typically, or enough admin hours, that they are relatively convinced that the other things that might come up have been dismissed. A really good example of how that works is, and this is an insider view, when Grace Kruniken was SDOT chair, and this was under Nichols, she created sort of a kitchen cabinet called Bike Freight Pedboard. and it included 3 each, or 4 each, depending on who showed up, representatives from the freight community. Warren Ackerman was there, right? I mean, all the usuals were there. I was there representing Feet First. Actually, Lisa Quinn was there representing Feet First. So Feet First had a good representation. Chuck Ayers at the time was Cascade Bike chair guy. And so we had really good discussions in the director's conference room there on whatever it is, the 34th floor of Muni Tower. And they would roll out, and we had a real traffic engineer at that time too, and I've forgotten his name, but they would roll out things like the Fauntleroy rechannelization, and they would, scale drawings on a huge table. And every single one of us would spend probably, it was 2-hour meetings about every 2 weeks, and we would go in and we would walk through everything, radius of curve for trucks, all that kind of thing. And so the engineering staff would take that into account and listen, because we were representing those different groups. But here's the catch. When we were done, that's the first time they actually brought it to the public. And I'm saying that even though that was a really good way of doing it, and that has not happened ever since then. I tried to talk Peter Hahn into restarting that when he became SDOT chair for Mike McGinn. He didn't pick it up, even though he agreed it was a great idea. So what I would like to see is rather than institute that with a small select group representing others, that when they get these brilliant ideas and they want to do things, that they go public from the get-go. Because we're the ones that are A, paying their salary, and B, being affected. And so to keep us out of the loop until they have a plan, I hate to use the phrase half-baked, but typically that's what it sounds like to me when they come out with one. And a good example is the 35th Avenue Safety Project. When Jim Curtin, he spent, 3 or 4 good months listening to people, walking around doing all sorts of things. But nothing changed. Absolutely nothing changed. And yet at this point in time we have a 50-50 split between, yes, I want one travel lane and 30 miles an hour, and no, I don't, but I wouldn't mind other safety features. So to me, that does not represent due diligence on behalf of the department. That represents the department machining the system so that they can show approval for a project that they sort of have already had an idea about how it would go. And so what I would change is, particularly for DPD and SDOT, early design guidance, we would have early design guidance, okay? Something hits DPD desk, oh, West Seattle, by the way, there's a new developer that you haven't heard of that's come to town that wants to do these kinds of things. That would make things a lot easier for DPD, a lot easier for SDOT, and it would lower the temperature for the discourse between the two sides of the equation. It really would, because the citizens feel left out because they are left out. And I know this only from having been, city neighborhood council chair for 3 years in a row, trying to beat things into council members' heads about things that they really needed to do, that we had reports to show that they ought to do, but they just ignored it. So I think a lot of us running in this race have that experience as activists, that we've beseeched our existing at-large council members, and we've gone to department heads. I know most of the department heads personally. Should that be the way a city operates? Maybe so. But you shouldn't have to be an activist who knows every department head personally to be able to get a good response from the city for things that affect you. So yes, as a council member, I think I would, first off, change the way of the process. But I also have a very strong feeling that however our new council winds up being, that all of those new council members, or those that wind up incumbent who get reelected, will have a different and more attuned ear to citizen input at an earlier phase, particularly after this Holla thing with the mayor. That was like, talk about dropping stuff out of the sky. So that's an example of what not to do, I think. And I think we knew that all along. How can you have a secret committee trying to figure out housing affordability when all the people that have housing are not part of the conversation? So.
You mentioned, everybody in the race. That's pretty much the last thing I'd like to ask you, which is, let's say somebody came up to you and said, I'm going to vote for, and they named one of the other 8 candidates. What would you tell them is the main reason they should change their mind and vote for you instead?
Well, the main reason is that I am a responsive human being to my fellow citizens, and have always followed through on everything that I said I would do, and I have never cut anyone short. So I have never played politics with anyone. You can vote anybody in office. In my case, you can look at what I've done for the community for the last dozen years, and you can see whether I've been responsive, whether I've done things that ought to be done, whether I've listened when changes were recommended, etc. And if I've been a responsive human being, if I've done good things for the community, if I've maintained your trust and maintained my own integrity, then, it's up to you. It's a democracy. But in my defense, I would say I have a lifetime commitment of honesty and integrity and follow through. And I'm a very smart person, and I'm a really quick learner, all of which has been a great advantage, not to me, but to all of those things that I've wanted to do for the community. So it would really be, do you want your city council member to be responsive and actually listen to you? Or do you want to put someone in office that, may or may not listen to you or may or may not follow through? I don't know.